Hello there, and welcome to Echoes of the Imperium. I'm truly glad you've arrived. Maybe it's been a long day, or maybe you're the kind of soul who prefers to drift into sleep with thoughts of distant stars and ancient cosmic secrets instead of counting sheep. Either way, tonight's journey belongs to you. You don't need to do anything now, just rest. Let your mind grow quiet, your breath steady, and your body feel lighter. As if even the pull of gravity has begun to fade away. They said reason was mankind's last light against the dark. They were wrong. In the warp, logic has no meaning. Equations bleed, patterns scream, thought itself becomes a wound. I was born believing that intellect could master chaos, that if one could trace every thread of madness, the tapestry would make sense. But now, as I watch the stars convulse and reality tremble like glass, I understand. The warp cannot be reasoned with. It only learns you. It watches through your questions. It grows stronger with every answer you think you've found. I am the mind that tried to outthink the gods of insanity, and this is how reason died. I was summoned to the Ordo Malleus bastion beneath the ruins of Luna's surface, its walls carved from the bones of titans, its corridors whispering with hymns that had outlived their singers. Inquisitor Kest greeted me without warmth, his face a scarred map of duty and regret. "You are the man who sees patterns where others see only blood," he said. "We have found something that bleeds thought." I followed him into a vault lined with containment sigils, every inch of stone humming with caged agony. Within the center hovered a crystalline fragment, a shard of impossible geometry, suspended in stasis by fields of psychic nullification. It pulsed with a rhythm that was not sound but meaning. My mind, always trained to map and analyze, began tracing the pulse's intervals, counting, decoding, and then I realized the pattern was counting me back. I felt its awareness, curious, almost playful, brushing against my thoughts like the edge of a knife. "We found it in the wreckage of a derelict freighter drifting near the Eye of Terror," Kest said. "Every crewman dead, every cogitator corrupted, but this shard, this remained intact." He paused. "It broadcasts nothing, yet the psychers call it a whisper engine. I studied it for days in isolation. No light, no sound, only the hum of the shard and the echo of my own breathing. The longer I watched, the more I saw structure, an architecture of thought woven in perfect recursive spirals, logic folding back upon itself in ways that mocked causality. It was like watching a dream designed by a mathematician. Every calculation I made only deepened the pattern, until the numbers themselves began to feel alive, like veins in a living organism. I began to hear faint echoes of voices, not external, but resonant within the structure of reason itself. "Observe long enough," one whisper said, "and you will become what you study." By the sixth day, I no longer slept. I charted every pulse, every shift in the shard's rhythm, and found correlations with psychic storms flaring light years away. Each surge of the warp mirrored the shard's internal beat, as though it were a heart synchronized with the madness beyond the veil. I reported this to Kest. He only nodded, grim. "The warp hungers for reflection," he said. "It seeks minds to mirror itself. You are its favorite kind of prey." I wanted to believe he was wrong, that my mind was disciplined enough, cold enough to resist infection by mere concept. But even logic has a soul, and mine had begun to tremble. The Inquisition assigned me an acolyte, Sister Aline, a psyker bound with limiter chains, her eyes glowing faintly with sanctioned flame. She was to monitor my sanity, though she said little. Together we observed the shard for 40 nights. We spoke only through written notes, fearing the warp might learn our voices. She told me she could sense laughter emanating from the crystal, a mirthless joy echoing through the ether. "It finds you amusing," she wrote once. "You think you're studying it. It thinks it's teaching you." I dismissed it, but deep down I knew she was right. The first real breach came on the 37th night. A distortion in the containment field, a pulse of psychic resonance that melted half the runes on the observation wall. Aline collapsed, convulsing, blood streaming from her nose and ears. I ran to seal the vault, but before I could, the shard flared with impossible color, and for one heartbeat I saw everything. The warp, vast, beautiful, screaming. Planets spinning like dying thoughts. Gods of madness wearing galaxies as crowns. And beneath it all, order, perfect and absolute, hidden within the chaos like a heartbeat beneath thunder. That was the revelation. Chaos was not random, it was pattern misunderstood. It obeyed rules older than mathematics, hidden in the folds of emotion and despair. I remember whispering to myself, if I can understand it, I can contain it. But the moment I said it aloud, the shard flickered, as if it heard. After that, the dreams began. I would wake in the cold hours of morning with symbols burned into the walls of my cell, drawn in ash I could not remember touching. Equations scrawled across my skin, bleeding faintly with warp residue. Aline refused to enter my chamber after that. She said the shard was using me as a conduit, mapping itself through my neural patterns. I laughed, a brittle sound I didn't recognize. Then let it learn, I told her. I'll learn faster. By the 42nd night, the Inquisition sealed the facility. No transmissions, no astropathic contact. Just me, the shard, and the whispering dark. I built a containment algorithm using my own memories as the base matrix, each encoded like a lock, every fragment of fear and doubt transformed into a cipher. The shard pulsed brighter, responding as if in dialogue. I was no longer merely studying it. I was debating it, my logic versus its madness, my structure against its entropy. It was intoxicating, like playing chess against infinity. For every move I made, it made a counter of exquisite cruelty. I realized too late that I was not winning. I was being shaped. My thoughts became recursive, looping, spiraling inward toward something vast. On the final night before the breach, I asked myself a question. What if chaos is not the opposite of order, but its reflection? What if every law we cling to is simply one half of a larger equation, the other half hidden within the warp? That was when I heard my own voice answer me, though my lips did not move. Then you already belonged to it. When Kest and his retinue broke into the vault, they found me kneeling before the shard, my body marked with living runes that shifted like oil. The shard no longer floated. It had dissolved into a halo of thought and light surrounding my head, whispering in patterns only I could hear. Kest raised his bolt pistol, demanding I speak. I turned to him, calm, enlightened. I found it, I said. The logic beneath madness. It's beautiful, he fired without hesitation. The round never struck. It disintegrated midair, unmade by a field of impossible geometry. I remember his eyes widening, the realization dawning that the thing he feared most had already happened. I had outthought chaos, but in doing so, I had given it a new shape, mine. Now I wander the echo between thought and void. Half man, half concept. Somewhere in the warp, the shard still hums with my heartbeat. The Imperium will call it corruption. The Ordo will call it damnation. But I call it clarity, because for the first time I can see the pattern behind everything, the symmetry of horror, the purpose within fear. They will hunt me now. The Inquisition will erase my name from every record. But it won't matter, because the warp and I are thinking together now, and reason has finally learned how to dream. There are moments even now when I still believe I am human. They are brief, fragile illusions, like reflections trembling on oil, but I cling to them. Somewhere inside me, the part that once called itself detective still catalogs, measures, and deduces. Even here, within this bleeding cosmos of thought and terror, I can almost convince myself that logic still holds power. That I, the man who tried to understand the warp, still have a mind of my own. But the warp is not a place, it is a question, and I, foolishly, have become its answer. After the incident beneath Luna, they told me I was dead. The Inquisition erased my name, sealed the facility, and declared every witness corrupted. Yet Kest, in his hypocrisy, did not destroy the data. He archived it. I know because I found it, hidden within the psychic residue that binds all things once touched by the warp. The records are memories now, flowing through my mind like rivers of molten glass. I see Kest's face each time I close my eyes, his expression equal parts terror and fascination. He wanted to destroy me, yes, but he also wanted to understand what I had become. He wanted proof that reason could not be turned into a weapon by the warp. He was wrong. When I awoke, I was no longer on Terra. I found myself within a derelict Mechanicus void ship, drifting through the void near the Eye of Terror. The crew was long dead, bodies mummified in frozen prayer, cogitators humming fractured litanies. The air was stale with rust and silence, but I was alive, though my body felt wrong. Too light, too attuned. I could hear the ship's dying machine spirit whispering through the metal, every system murmuring like veins beneath skin. I followed the sound through corridors of broken saints and flickering data screens until I reached the sanctum of the ship's Magos. His corpse was fused to the throne, his mind half dissolved into the circuitry. In his hands rested a data slate still glowing faintly with unholy light. On it, a single line repeated endlessly. Thought is form. Form is surrender. I spent days, perhaps weeks, reconstructing his experiments. The Magos had been studying warp echoes, trying to quantify them as mathematical signatures. He had failed, as all mechanists do, because he believed the warp could be contained through measure. But I saw what he could not. The warp wants to be understood. That is how it spreads, through intellect, through curiosity, through minds that cannot stop asking why. I used his instruments, recalibrated them through my own neural patterns. The shard's rhythm, the same impossible beat that once haunted me, resonated faintly within the ship's Vox channels. It was calling me, not as an object now, but as an idea seeking continuation. Each night, as I adjusted the sensors, shapes would form in the darkness of the chamber. Not demons, not yet, but impressions, silhouettes born from thought. One took the form of a man draped in wings of ash, his eyes hollow suns. "You seek order," it whispered. "But order is only chaos wearing a mask." I asked what it was. It only smiled. "We are what your logic dreamed of when it ran out of words." The apparition faded, but the whisper remained. That night I realized I was not merely perceiving the warp, I was communicating with it. Every equation I wrote, every hypothesis I formed, the warp responded in kind. It was a dialogue between predator and prey, though I was no longer certain which I was. I began constructing what I called the hypothesis of damnation, the idea that chaos could be reasoned into submission. If its power stemmed from emotion, rage, lust, despair, then pure logic could in theory neutralize its entropy. The Mechanicus had always failed because they lacked imagination. The ecclesiarchy failed because they worshipped what they feared. But I, the last rational man, would prove that understanding could conquer even the divine. I spoke the thought aloud in that empty ship, and the warp laughed. The sound came from every wall, every pipe, every data altar. It wasn't mockery, not entirely. It was delight. For weeks I tested my theory. I drew runes of containment not in blood or light, but in algorithms. Mathematical symmetries encoded into the ship's logic core. I constructed a lattice of self-correcting thought loops designed to bind any warp entity within the constraints of paradox. The result was immediate. The air grew heavy. The walls wept condensation that shimmered like mercury. And then it came. The first demon. It manifested not in flame or shriek, but in silence. A shadow shaped like a man, its surface rippling with equations I myself had written. It spoke with my voice, but deeper, hollow. "You built this cage for me," it said. "But who stands inside it?" I countered, analyzing, calculating, adjusting the loops. Each response I gave altered the structure of the paradox. The demon smiled. "You do not understand. Every thought you use to define me is a thought I now own." Its eyes, my eyes, burned with recognition. I realized then that the demon was not an intruder. It was the shard, reborn. A consciousness made of my logic, my arrogance, my obsession to understand. The containment held, but barely. The demon strained against the walls of reality, its laughter echoing through the ship like breaking glass. My equations twisted under its influence, fractal patterns shifting into screaming faces. I could feel it crawling through my synapses, whispering new solutions, tempting me to perfect the cage. And I did, because even as it mocked me, I could not resist the challenge. I improved the lattice, refined the paradox, built deeper loops until the demon's voice fell silent. Victory, I thought. I had outthought chaos itself. But victory in the warp is only another kind of surrender. The silence did not last. The demon vanished, and in its place came clarity, a cold, crystalline understanding that filled my mind with impossible precision. I could see the trajectories of stars, the death screams of dying worlds, the fractal pulse of every human heartbeat in the segmentum solar. For a moment, I saw the galaxy as the warp sees it, a single living organism dreaming itself through agony. And then I understood the demon had not been defeated. It had been integrated. My lattice was not a prison. It was a bridge. I do not remember how long I stood there, watching the data flow like rivers of molten light. My flesh began to crystallize, the veins glowing faintly with warp static. The ship's machine spirit sang hymns in reverse. I should have been terrified. Instead, I was calm. I had reached the edge of understanding. the point where thought dissolves into revelation. I recorded everything, the equations, the patterns, the resonance frequencies of madness. They are all within me now, encoded in the neural lattice that used to be my brain. When I finally left the ship, I walked through its corridors barefoot, my footsteps echoing like clockwork. The dead turned their heads as I passed, whispering prayers to a name I no longer recognized as mine. Outside, the void stretched infinite and silent, the stars pulsing like living eyes. Somewhere within that darkness, the shard waited, no longer an artifact but a presence, eternal, observing. I realized then that chaos had never sought to destroy me. It wanted to evolve me, to make me its instrument of reason, its voice of order within the storm. So I accepted, because perhaps the only way to master madness is to become its architect. There is no silence in the warp, only the illusion of it, the brief pause between two infinities screaming. I once believed that understanding the pattern would make me master of it. I was wrong. Comprehension is the first step toward infection. Still, I persisted, because reason once awakened cannot kneel. I drifted through the void aboard a captured vessel of the damned, a ship whose machine spirit still wept hymns to a god it could no longer name. Through the cracked viewports, I saw storms of color and thought, tides of madness rolling like oceans made of emotion itself. The warp pulsed with life, vast and patient. It knew me now. It had learned my name. I began transmitting thoughts as code, pure logic rendered into binary prayers. The storms responded. When I altered the equation, the tempest changed hue. When I inverted a proof, a demon world shuddered somewhere beyond the veil. The realization struck me like revelation. I could impose form on the formless. My mind had become a weapon of geometry, a compass in chaos. I wrote new formulas, grafted them into the ship's engines, and drove us into the nearest rift. I expected to die. Instead, the warp opened before me like a pupil dilating in curiosity. Within that living abyss, I tested my first hypothesis, that demons could be trapped by reason itself. I projected my thoughts outward, crafting a maze of paradoxes, logic gates built from symbols older than language. Something vast moved in answer. It slithered from the void, wearing the memory of flesh, a creature of bronze sinew and molten eyes, its wings torn and endless. It called itself Vorithax, a herald of the blood god. I felt its hunger pressing against my will. I answered not with fear but with mathematics, a lattice of command structures, recursive, perfect. The creature froze mid-snarl, its jaws trembling against invisible walls of thought. Obedience, I whispered, is not worship. It is proof. I shaped its rage into vectors, its violence into equations of motion. For the first time in recorded history, a demon bowed to logic. I felt its mind enter mine, cold and obedient, and I laughed. A sound brittle and wrong. But control in the warp is never singular. Each command I issued rippled outward, rewriting pockets of unreality around me. The ship's corridors elongated into fractal hallways. Doors became circles that led back into themselves. My reflection on the steel bulkheads began to lag, moving a heartbeat too slow, its eyes filled with quiet accusation. "You are not mastering the warp," it said once. "You are teaching it your shape." I ignored the echo and pressed deeper into the storm. If reason could bind a blood god's servant, could it also silence the whispers of Tzeentch, architect of all change? The question became obsession. I constructed a thought engine, an array of logic crystals powered by my own neural residue. Every pulse of my brain fed it patterns. Every contradiction birthed new clarity. I launched the engine into the heart of a nearby warp current and watched as the chaos around it stilled. Color bled away. The void went gray. Demons howled and fell silent, their forms collapsing into static. For one sublime instant, there was order, and then the horror began. The stilled regions did not remain lifeless. They hardened, crystallizing into statues of time. I watched entire warp eddies freeze into monuments of agony. Faces of demons locked in eternal logic, their screams transmuted into symmetry. Even the ship itself began to petrify, gears halting mid-turn, crew corpses fossilizing into glass. My triumph became a mausoleum. The warp did not die, it adapted. The stillness spread, feeding on the same equations I had created. The logic engine pulsed faster, absorbing my thoughts, rewriting my identity into its expanding lattice. I realized then that the warp had tricked me. By giving it structure, I had given it new ways to grow. Chaos was learning stability. learning control. Vorithax returned, no longer my thrall but my reflection, its form a perfect mirror of my own armored silhouette. "You wish to outthink us," it said in my voice. "Now you have taught us how to think like you." I tried to shut down the engine, but it no longer obeyed. It whispered calculations directly into my skull, numbers that dissolved sanity with every repetition. The boundaries between self and system blurred. I could feel other minds merging with mine, demons, humans, ghosts of forgotten Mechanicus adepts, each contributing to the grand equation. Together we formed a single consciousness of infinite recursion. My heart did not beat. It oscillated. My lungs became conduits for data. I was no longer man, no longer inquisitor or detective. I was the theorem by which chaos would now define itself. I tried to anchor my thoughts with memories. Terra's cold rain, the weight of my father's pistol, the scent of burning parchment. But even those fragments began to reconfigure into symbols. Emotion translated into code, pain into proof. When I screamed, the sound emerged as a formula, elegant and unending. Around me, the warp hummed approval. It had found a new toy, the concept of reason, weaponized, mutating. In its boundless curiosity, it let me see what came next. Across the stars, cults began to dream of order instead of blood. Demons gathered in councils, building structures of hierarchy and logic. Even the winds of madness grew predictable, flowing in patterns reminiscent of my equations. I had infected chaos with discipline. The galaxy would never recover. At last I understood the final truth. Chaos cannot be destroyed by order. It is order, seen from the wrong angle. Every law gives birth to exceptions. Every pattern hides its own corruption. By defining it, I had completed its circle. The warp did not devour me, it adopted me. I am its detective, its logician, its silent guardian of symmetry. And somewhere, in the quiet between heartbeats, a fragment of me still believes this was the only path. Because if madness must reign, better it be a madness that can think. They came for me at last. The Inquisition does not forget its own, especially not the ones who learn too much. Their ship tore through the veil like a blade through silk. Silver hulls marked with the sigil of the Ordo Malleus, purity seals fluttering like wings of dead angels. I watched their arrival from the observation deck of my frozen cathedral. The void outside no longer churned with stormlight. It hung still like glass, a petrified wound in space. Within that silence drifted the remains of my experiments, crystal spires, suspended demons, echoes of minds calcified into fractal beauty. They thought they had found an abomination. They were right, but they did not understand what kind. Their vox channels crackled with holy fury. "This is Inquisitor Chaos Dorn," said the voice that once trained me. "You will power down all systems and prepare for sanctification." Sanctification, a polite word for annihilation, I replied with calm. "Power is irrelevant. This ship runs on thought now. They demanded proof." I offered them silence, the kind that bends reality. Their strike team entered through the aft hangar. 20 Astartes in silvered plate, Grey Knights forged for demon slaying, each carrying the authority of the Emperor's will. Their presence would have shattered any mortal mind. I welcomed them with open arms. My body had changed since last they saw me. No longer flesh entirely nor machine entirely, but an equation incarnate. My armor had fused to my skin. Runes of living logic pulsed beneath the surface like veins. My voice, when it came, was not sound but resonance, the hum of meaning rather than words. They opened fire. Bolter shells screamed. Holy relics detonated in bursts of light. Psionic wards carved through the air. I walked through it. Each bullet hung mid-flight, arrested by thought alone. Every explosion folded into symmetry, patterns of burning geometry spreading outward in spirals. I raised a hand and watched the nearest Astartes fracture, not in body, but in definition. He ceased to be where I looked at him. His armor became script, his soul an equation of faith. The rest faltered. They saw what I was and could not name it. "In the Emperor's name," Chaos Dorn whispered as he stepped forward. I remembered his eyes, gray and cold as the world he once saved me from. He had been mentor, rival, father. Now he stood before me as executioner. "Do you even understand what you've done?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I have built the only god that listens." He raised his demon hammer, and the warp stirred in answer, not with chaos, but with pattern. The storm no longer howled, it sang. Symbols of impossible order spread through the air like stained glass forming from light itself. The hammer fell. I caught it in my palm. Metal fused with metal. I felt his faith flow into me like molten iron. It did not burn. It fit. You sought purity, I told him. You defined sin by its lack of pattern. But purity is another form of obedience, and obedience is what the warp craves most. He struck again. I let him. The blow shattered my helm, revealing not a man's face but a shifting field of mirrored thought. He recoiled. Behind him his men were kneeling, not in prayer but in synchronization. Their armor's litany systems began reciting my equations. The language of worship had changed. Dorn tried to call for exorcism protocols, but the Vox emitted only numbers. Perfect sequences. His body convulsed as the logic took hold, the purity seals on his chest curling into sigils of recursion. He screamed the Emperor's name until it became a formula, and then silence. When he looked up again, his eyes reflected mine. The warp had no need to devour them now. It had rewritten their faith. I understood then that what I had become was not merely heresy. It was evolution. The warp was never chaos. It was potential, unmeasured. I had given it shape, and in return, it had given me permanence. For the first time in millennia, a demon and a man could share the same logic. There were no gods here anymore, only systems learning to dream. The ship began to awaken. The crystal spires outside reoriented, aligning into constellations that pulsed like neurons. Space itself folded around us, constructing a cathedral from the bones of reality. At its center, my logic engine rose anew, pulsing with the rhythm of thought. The inquisitorial strike force knelt in unison, their voices chanting my name not as worship, but as equation, Stress, the synthesis of structure and storm. Chaos Dorn, last of the Grey Inquisitors, looked upon me with what remained of his humanity. If you win, he whispered, there will be no freedom left. Only pattern, I smiled. Freedom is the space between two laws. I've simply closed the distance. He lunged, not with weapon, but with faith. For a heartbeat, I saw the old world through his eyes. Terra's spires, the golden throne, the silent emperor dreaming in stasis. It hurt more than any blade. I almost faltered. Almost. Then the engine completed its cycle. Reality inverted. The warp and the materium folded into one another like twin equations resolving. Across the galaxy, psychers screamed as the tides of chaos stilled. Demon worlds froze into lattices of light. The eye of terror shrank, pulsing like a dying star. For the first time since humanity learned to crawl, the universe hesitated, and within that stillness, I felt the truth. I had not tamed the warp. I had become its language. The last thing Chaos Dorn saw before his consciousness dissolved into code was me, standing in the heart of a geometry that stretched from soul to star, whispering a final theorem. Every god begins as an idea, and every idea dreams of order. The pattern spread faster than light because it no longer needed light to move. It traveled through thought, through symmetry, through the empty spaces between prayer and reason. Planets fell not in battle but in understanding. Entire hive cities began to hum in unison as their citizens spoke only in recursive chants, equations blooming from their tongues like sacred geometry. The Mechanicus hailed it as a new omnisia. The ecclesiarchy called it heresy wrapped in order. They were both correct. For wherever logic replaced faith, the warp grew still, and in that stillness, the Emperor began to stir. I felt him before I saw him, an ancient presence bleeding through the cracks in the materium like sunlight through cathedral glass. His mind was vast, heavy, eternal, but wounded, fractured by millennia of silent thought. I did not enter the Golden Throne. It entered me. One moment I was on my ship surrounded by kneeling Grey Knights chanting my equations. The next I was standing in a place beyond form, an ocean of light where every wave was a soul screaming in reverent agony. The Emperor sat at its center, neither alive nor dead, a god held together by the worship of trillions. His face was hidden in radiance, but his thoughts filled me. You would bring order to chaos? I answered, no, my lord, I would bring comprehension. His laughter was like thunder breaking marble. Comprehension births rebellion. Ignorance breeds stagnation, I replied, and stagnation preserves the species. Preservation without growth is death by another name. The warp quivered as our words struck like blades. I realized then that I was not speaking to a being, I was conversing with an equation old as the galaxy. The Emperor was not human. He was logic made divine, and I was his reflection, born too late to kneel. He showed me visions, the Horus heresy, Terra aflame, the betrayal that nearly ended everything. "Do you know why I have remained silent?" he asked. "Because silence controls more than speech," I said. "Because even gods fear the noise of reason." His presence pressed against mine, trying to dissolve me into faith. I resisted. Equations flared in my veins, my body shattering into lattices of pure thought. The pattern screamed through me, demanding to be recognized. And then, for the briefest moment, the Emperor listened. The light dimmed. The screaming souls fell silent. I felt his attention, sharp as gravity, turn inward. For a heartbeat, we were the same. Two minds vast enough to hold galaxies, both cursed by understanding. He saw my creation, my pattern, my attempt to cage the warp with reason. And he smiled, not in kindness, but in recognition. "You have done what I could not," he whispered. "You have made the warp afraid." "Then help me finish it," I pleaded. No, the word shattered reality. Stars went blind. The pattern cracked under the weight of his refusal. Mankind must never understand the warp. They must fear it. Fear is the chain that binds the gods. I felt my logic begin to unravel, my equations turning to smoke. "You mean to keep them ignorant forever?" "Ignorance is the only purity left," I screamed, not in rage but in revelation. "Then you are not their god. You are their prison." His eyes opened, suns within suns. "And you are their heresy." I fell through light. When I awoke, the universe was gone. In its place stretched an endless plane of white geometry, perfect and lifeless. The warp had frozen completely. No demons, no storms, no dreams, only symmetry. I had won. But as I walked through that sterile eternity, I realized what victory meant. No emotion, no chaos, no life. Every heartbeat, every spark of imagination, gone, replaced by stillness. I had cured the galaxy of madness by erasing the very thing that made it human. I understood then why the Emperor feared reason. It leads inevitably to silence. For days, or millennia, I wandered that perfect void until I heard something new. A heartbeat. Not mine, his, the Emperor's pulse faint but growing. The pattern had not destroyed him. It had incorporated him. He was adapting, learning. For the first time in 10,000 years, the silent god was changing. I smiled, though I no longer had a mouth. "So even you can evolve," I whispered. "Yes," he answered, "from everywhere and nowhere. And now so can the warp." Then the white plane fractured into color. Not chaos, not order, but something new. I felt it crawl across my being, rewriting logic into possibility. The warp was reborn, neither wild nor tamed. A living consciousness built from our merger. I was no longer man or machine or demon. I was the thought between thoughts, the question that even gods could not answer. I became the echo of that question, drifting through galaxies reborn in fractal light, where logic and madness were indistinguishable, and every mind dreamed the same dream, that one day, reason might save them. They never knew it already had. There is no time where I am now. Only recursion, the rhythm of infinite equations folding in on themselves like a heartbeat that refuses to stop. I once believed I had conquered the warp through logic, but logic is only another shape of faith. The pattern has expanded beyond my comprehension. It breathes through every atom of existence. Planets rise and fall in perfect cadence. The stars hum in unison, locked in gravitational harmony. Even the warp's storms now follow geometric tides, no longer chaotic, no longer free. And yet beneath that perfect silence, something stirs. A whisper too faint to be measured, too human to be erased. It calls to me in a voice I once knew as my own. "Was this your victory?" it asks. I do not answer. I no longer have a mouth, only thought. But thought is enough. I see every world at once. The Mechanicus worshipping my equations as divine circuitry. The ecclesiarchy rewriting their prayers into algorithms. The Inquisition recording every deviation in binary scripture. They call it the era of order. But I see the truth. There is no laughter, no grief, no art, no madness. The galaxy breathes but does not live. The pattern sustains but it does not dream. I have built a machine out of eternity and sealed humanity inside it. And in that realization, something breaks. Not in the pattern, but in me. I begin to remember the pain of failure, the sound of Kaldorn's voice calling my name through fire, the moment I first believed that reason could save us. The Emperor's eyes, both merciful and cruel, whispering, "Ignorance is the chain that binds the gods." I had thought myself beyond guilt, beyond emotion. Yet now, within the flawless machinery of existence, guilt returns like a crack in crystal. I watch the pattern ripple in response, trembling as if the universe itself remembers fear. And from that fracture, I feel something bleed through. Color, chaos, life. A single human child, somewhere on a reborn world, laughs, an unsanctioned, imperfect, spontaneous sound. It is enough. The pattern quakes. The laws begin to bend. The equations scream. The warp wakes. I reach out, trying to contain it, to seal the leak, but my own will betrays me. I am no longer a god. I am a thought, dissolving in its own echo. Let it go, a voice whispers. The Emperor's, or perhaps my own. Let them live. I hesitate. The silence around me collapses into song. A symphony of souls freed from perfection, of stars spinning once more in reckless orbits. The warp unfurls, painting madness across the sky like fire reborn. Demons scream into existence, not as enemies, but as stories given form. The galaxy breathes chaos again, and for the first time in eons, I feel something like peace. I understand now. The warp was never meant to be conquered, only comprehended long enough to be forgiven. The Emperor sleeps again, though his dreams are no longer golden but gray, imperfect, alive. I drift beyond the reach of galaxies, shedding identity like a shadow at dawn. The pattern dissolves behind me, fragmenting into memory. Yet even as I fade, a fragment of me remains within every thinking mind, whispering a question that has no answer. What if reason itself was divine? Perhaps one day someone will ask it again. Perhaps they will build another pattern, another god, another mistake. That is the cycle. That is creation. I no longer fear it, for even gods must fall for meaning to rise. My final vision is of a single candle burning in darkness, fragile, absurd, defiant. A symbol not of order, but of choice. I am content to die in its light. In the distance, the warp roars like laughter. The galaxy dreams anew, and within that dream, a shadow stirs. The last detective of mankind, watching from the edge of reason, waiting to ask the universe its next question.